Okay, and one more time, it is about 6:01 and it's Thursday, the 23rd of June. And we are waiting to call the meeting to order. Before we can do that, Leonora Polania needs to have a quick sidebar with Shannon Kelly Ray, and she'll be back in a moment. So let's stand by and wait for the rest of our task force members to join us and for Leonora to join us.
There we go. Aha. Now you can hear me. Can you hear me? Good.
Mute. Hi, everyone. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Thank you so much for waiting, and welcome task force members. So we'd like to call the meeting to order. The City of Kenmore Diversity, Equity, Inclusion meeting to order for Thursday, June 23rd, 2022. I will now take the roll. And I would like to please ask that task force members, if you could have your cameras on and say you are verbally present as I call your name, that would be fantastic. Thank you so very much. All right, Darlene Ademba. Darlene. Juanita Aguilar.
Here.
Juanita, you're here, yes?
Present.
Okay. David Arthur. Marco Ballesteros. Lily Bishop.
Here.
Bill Castro. Peggy Evans. Peggy Evans. Jeannie Galloway. Carlos Gill.
Right here.
All right. Juliana Pooley.
Present. Here.
Nancy Tai.
Nancy Tai is being promoted right now.
All right. Nancy Tai. And finally, Aisha Jallo.
Present.
Oh, Darlene Ademba. Welcome, Darlene. I see you're present.
Yeah, I'm present. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. So with that, we will now move to public comments. It's now time for public comment, and we'd like to hear from you. If you could please raise your hand if you would like to speak, and you will have 2 minutes to give comment. Anastasia, do we have anyone from the community who's raising their hand or interested in public comment?
Thank you, Leonora. At this time, we have no guests on site wishing to speak, and I see no hands raised.
Okay, thank you. We will now move to the approval of minutes at this point. On the approval of the minutes, which you received prior to the meeting, I will suggest that we approve the minutes through unanimous consent. All in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. Hearing none, the minutes stand approved. All right, task force, as we move into agenda items, we just want to share a big thank you to the task force members. You performed outreach, you volunteered in our community and provided valuable feedback during these meetings. Your participation and insightful feedback helped us with shaping and developing, creating a policy that you all had a part in, and we would have not been able to do this without you. Also, we would have not been able to do this without Shannon and our team. So big thank you and shout out to Shannon, and also to our DEIB advisory group made up of our staff members, Lauren Homiak, Brian Randall, and Janet Quinn. Thank you all so very much. So we'll go ahead and move to agenda items. And I'm going to pass this mic one last time to Shannon for our task force meeting.
Thank you so much, Leonora Plania. So you all should have gotten a copy of the City of Kenmore Staff DEI Workplace Culture Survey. This was a survey administered to staff with to get a good grounding understanding and to do an assessment of what it looks like and means to be an employee for an organization, the municipality, that is an organization that also serves as their employer. And let me go to the contents for today, because it'll explain both approach, who took the survey, what we were looking for in terms of demographic breakdowns and factors and findings. So today we're going to present to you both the approach, key insights, and then you'll also have, and you should have also been able to look at the raw data, which is the main findings in terms of the dashboard pages or data, as well as the open-ended responses from members of staff. In terms of approach, first, the diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging as a theory of change within any organization supports the organization's ability to fully leverage the diversity of the folks that are engaged within the organization. That means that we want to be able to hear about the lived experiences, perspectives, and insights of people that are part of the City of Kenmore's workforce, so that we can draw from that information in order to set goals, in order to set objectives, and to identify key results. So what does that mean for City of Kenmore staff? We want to, with that information, create a better environment or a place from which they work. We want them to experience trust, value, and respect. We want them to fully realize an organization that is positioned uniquely as an inclusive place that affords access, opportunity, and then, of course, a sense of belonging. And because none of those things are automatic, it requires deliberate and intentional effort on the part of leadership, on the part of managers and all staff, really, to create a culture so that people may be able to work effectively. We can fully leverage their talents, but also build and grow them in their talent. Because ultimately the goal is that we want to be able to recruit, retain, and promote and build and develop the strengths of the people that do work on behalf of the community through the municipality. So that only happens in changing the culture, and everyone has to take some ownership in that. And allowing for you as a task force to be an interested third party means that you can listen to what they've said, you can review the recommendations and insights that my staff has shared, but as members of the community and the people who would benefit from this work, and people who would benefit from a fully engaged and responsive workforce, we want to make sure that you look at this as well, so that the staff knows that members of the community who are represented by this work also have a say, can hold leaders accountable, and provide, most importantly, some transparency and some accountability to create change on behalf of the staff that do the work for you every day. So that's kind of the why. The 8 drivers, again, of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are built around these 8 critical pillars: diverse representation, psychological safety and voice, transparency and accountability, an equitable system of rules and governance, shared benefit and mutual interest, belonging and connection, value and acceptance of differences, and having a commitment to change. So all of these things together create, again, the framework, the lens through which we hold ourselves accountable, that we build objectives and key results, and that we do the work that we do in order to create space for everyone to be able to succeed and do well. So the survey was hosted by a third party. That was my consulting firm, Shannon Kelly Ray Consulting. It was a self-administered internal online survey that was self-directed or self-guided. So it was delivered through City of Kenmore email to the email boxes of all of the employees of the City of Kenmore. There are 55 staff that received the survey. 33 people did the survey. And of those 36 respondents, 66% completed every question. So there was an option that people may not want to answer, for example, the open-ended question at the end. That would mean that you didn't have 100% completion. So it didn't mean that they only answered 1 or 2 questions. It meant that they may have chose 1 or often 2 to not complete. And generally the one that many people didn't complete was sometimes one of the demographic questions or the open-ended survey. And you'll see that in the raw data in the appendices. The survey was administered between May 2nd and June 3rd of 2022. Some of the demographic breaks that we looked for in terms of recognition and self-identification for staff was to self-identify their gender, highest level of education, race and ethnicity, and tenure with the City of Kenmore. Kenmore is unique in that they have less than 60 staff that work on behalf of the municipality. Many of their neighboring communities have staffs ranging anywhere from several hundred to up to 1,000 employees. And then, of course, the City of Seattle is an outlier. There's a lot of people that work for the municipality, that's the City of Seattle. But in terms of East Side suburbs, they generally range between 200 and 300 and 800, up to 800, 850 employees. So City of Kenmore is a very small, relatively new, one of our younger municipalities. But we had good participation from staff. And so I'm excited to present to you the findings of our survey. Again,
and then one clarification, if I could ask a question on the prior slide.
Yes.
So you mentioned some didn't complete 100% and leaving 1 question or more out would qualify as, not fully completing it.
Yes.
So do you have the percentage that completed the survey to some extent?
100% of the 36 people that did the survey completed the survey. So 36, so we had 55 people that got the invitation. 36 people participated in the survey, and of the 36 people, we had a 66% completion rate.
Oh, okay. And how was this survey presented to them? Like, was there like a staff meeting to talk about it? Like, it was, I'm asking about like the leading to the survey activities.
So first of all staff participated in the Deconstructing Our Bias training and knew that a survey was coming. We mentioned the survey along the way. Department directors would have mentioned the survey was coming. Rob Garlindsey, the city manager, sent the email introducing the idea that in another 24 to 48 hours, a survey would be coming, and they got regular emails and updates along the way. So they got emails to introduce the survey several times leading up. Directors mentioned that the survey was coming and why, who would be administering it, what we do with the information. The city manager let them know in a day or two before they got the survey that it was coming. And then 7 days, I believe it was, after the survey, they got another reminder and another invitation for folks that didn't complete the survey. And then they got another email and reminder. So many times along the way, they were invited to do the survey. It's a voluntary survey. They weren't compelled or required to do it, but they were welcomed and invited to.
Okay, and so 66% is the percentage of responses, right? Yes. But does that capture everybody who responded to any extent, or if someone just responded at 1 question, are they out?
Everyone's counting. Okay. And again, if you look at the appendices of the slides that you got, you're able to go through and look at how many people responded to each question. So you can go from question to question, and it'll tell you for question number 1 or question number 10 or question number 11, it tells you how many people completed each question.
And is 60% in your experience a good number? And was it in line with what the city expected?
They were hoping to get 100%. Everybody wants 100%. They set it as a reach goal to get 75%. We got 66%.
Mhm.
Generally people get anywhere from, 35, 38 to maybe 40, 45%. When they do a survey of the workforce, because people forget it, don't want to do it, don't
Mhm.
value. So, a myriad of different reasons. But
Mhm.
generally, people feel happy if they've gotten 50% of the workforce to do the survey. I just did a workplace culture survey for a large private sector organization with 2,060 employees,
Mhm.
and they got 1,123 responses. So they were good with the just over 50%, like 55%. They were good with the 55%.
Mhm. And do you read into it at all? Like, does that percentage tell you anything at all about like the work environment or
At this number, no. This
no?
is a healthy response rate. If they had 55 staff and only 12 people responded, then that would be concerning. But the
Mhm.
fact that they had more than half the staff, they had 60% of staff that would participate, that is a strong, healthy number.
Good to know. Okay, thank you.
Carlos.
66% is a pretty low, poor showing. But I'm curious how we compare to Bothell and these other cities that you mentioned the other day.
In terms of the response rate?
A response rate, yes.
Yeah, the response rate is healthy. So that is a strong response rate compared to.
So are you saying that our response rate in Kenmore was better, stronger, a higher number than Bothell?
Bothell hasn't done their workforce survey yet. But
Oh,
when you compare it to Redmond, when you compare it to Kirkland and even the private sector clients in the area that I have, 66% is a good response rate.
but I guess we have to keep in mind that if a staff person in Kenmore or in any other organization gets an email asking them to comply with the survey, I guess in my mind, that staff person is going to have all kinds of complicated responses as to why he or she ought to do that, and what is this diversity survey measuring. So I'm just wondering what the initial response might be on the part of staff people who haven't been hearing us at all, and all they do is just see an email in their on their laptop. Do you have any sense of that? You've been working with this a lot.
Yeah. What I'll tell you is staff knew that it's a voluntary survey. Staff know that they have the option to participate in an anonymous survey. They could choose to exercise or not exercise the option to do the survey. So it's totally their choice.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm stumbling over the idea that an average white staff person in any organization would have a very little interest in participating in a diversity survey. That's my sense of things.
Yeah. And, people have very different reasons with regard to why they would choose to participate or not participate. We don't ask that and we don't check for that.
Right.
All that they know is that it's a voluntary survey. They don't have to do the survey. They know why we're asking the information. They know that it's anonymous so that they enjoy the psychological safety to participate and know that there will be no consequence or retribution. So it's done openly and freely, and we don't go back to ask why didn't you or what's the rationale, especially that it was sold to them that it was voluntary and anonymous, so they could do it or not do it. So given that, 66% is a strong showing.
So in many ways, we're looking at the actions that the city council will take in order to implement better awareness of the issues that diversity might represent in the city of Kenmore, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Juliana?
I just wanted to talk back to Carlos a little bit and say that I've been a part of a few different organization workplace surveys similar to this. And in my experience, sometimes even the seemingly very mainstream white middle manager employee can be very hesitant to respond if they think there's anything in their responses which would make their responses no longer unique or anonymous. When it's very clear, like, oh, this is the only person in accounting or the only person with that level of education, and suddenly they're declaring their mental health or their income or their experience with domestic violence or whatever the specifics are in some of these diversities. Suddenly, it's amazing how much everyone has those intimate things where if they think, oh, do I really want my employer to know this? I know it's anonymous, but still there's enough buzz in the media about maybe these not being 100%, impossible from someone to crack and figure out. So I also want to say that in all of just a handful of workplace surveys that I've been a part of, 66% is higher than I have seen. So I want to say congratulations, Shannon. This does feel healthy for me. And also Carlos and everyone else. Like, yeah, it is really hard when you work really hard and people don't talk back and engage. Like, that sucks. And I get it. And sometimes I've had my own hesitation in checking all the boxes. But I'm really thrilled with what we got.
Yep.
I thank you, Juliana. I'm just recognizing that the word diversity to the average white staff person in any organization spells trouble, and I mean, that's the way it is. That's the way it is.
But I'll tell you, for this particular staff, and as I present, I think that you'll be pleasantly surprised then, Mr. Gill.
Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah. So I will start walking through what some of these findings are for you. So first of all, this is what the dashboard intro page looks like. So you get a good sense of minority versus non-minority, women, men, and people who prefer not to answer, different representation in the many different departments, people who are leadership, non-leadership, and so on, the different tenures. Interestingly, when you look at the numbers, one of the reasons that I like to look at whether or not someone has been in the organization today post-COVID, less at 1 to 5 years or 1 to 3 years, but certainly less than 5 years, is because people generally, and I've done this survey several times, or more than a few times, post-COVID or during COVID, people who work in an organization that are new, that on board in the middle of the pandemic, generally don't feel the same sense of connection, the same sense of belonging, haven't had the opportunity to meet with staff in person, to build longer, deeper relationships. When people talk about the great resignation or the great, upswing, whatever you want to call it, people over the course of the last 3 years have not been as connected to the organizations within which they join, because they, just haven't had the opportunity to build relationships. It's much more difficult. It's much more challenging to build relationships of trust and understanding, but bridge friendships with people that you only see on an occasional Zoom meeting, especially if you're an individual contributor doing a project and you aren't working as closely with colleagues. It's a lot tougher. It's a lot more difficult to build those connections. And that's one of the reasons that when people leave during exit surveys, and this is certainly not true of Kenmore, but I can tell you generally in other organizations where I've worked, and even the research that I've done, people that will leave organizations will oftentimes say that, one of the reasons they were leaving was that, information wasn't communicated. They didn't understand opportunity. They didn't know where their next role would be. They didn't know the process to grow within an organization. So there's all of this stuff that's missing in terms of what they can do, what they can find out, and how they connect in an organization where they're fully remote or hybrid in a way that they don't have the same connection with colleagues and especially with leaders. And that'll be important in some of the information that you see. You're able to look at, a lot of these different factors. Now, we didn't share factors by different demographic breaks because the staff is so small with the city of Kenmore that if we identified someone by race and gender and tenure in a department with a staff size, especially the one that's Kenmore's, you would be able to isolate that individual by name. We wanted to make sure that these results were presented in a way that were anonymized, that people wouldn't feel like, wait a second, look, they're telling what I said, they're pointing me out. Even in the open-ended responses, we were very clear in the instruction to please not include your department. Please don't share a specific story that would allow for you to no longer enjoy anonymity, because we turn over the raw data, and which you've seen in the appendices and for those open-ended responses, and we just don't want people to out themselves. So there's that.
Shannon, I'm not sure if it's intentional, but we can't see you.
Oh yeah, I just went off to make sure that my computer, that I don't lose my connection.
Oh,
But
I see.
I can jump back in if you need, but I just wanted, I'm having weird computer issues right now.
No, no worries. I do like to see you, but if you're having issues, it's okay.
Also, so you can see, a little bit closer to break, because I know that, maybe you're curious, well, what does the workforce look like in terms of gender? What does it look like in terms of representation of race, and where are people in these departments? So in terms of gender, 33% of the staff are men, 13.89% chose to not respond, and 52.78%, so 53% are women. So there's a lot of women that work for the municipality. When you look at where they work in terms of their assignment within the organization, 25% work as part of the city manager's office. Community development is at just over 8%, development services 11, environmental services at 8, finance and administration at 11, just over 11%. King County staff would be your sheriff's department, that are your police department, at just under 3%. Public works and engineering almost 17%, and again at almost 17% public works maintenance. So that is your staff. In terms of race and ethnicity, minority versus non-minority, 23% are non-minority, 13 are minority. Of that, you may notice a group missing. There is no one that self-identifies as Black or African American. There are people that are multiracial, American Indian or Alaskan Native, Asian or Asian American, Hispanic or Latinx. Almost 20% chose to not respond, and 63 or just about 64% self-identified as white or Caucasian. Now, are those numbers true and accurate? The fact that you have almost 20% choosing to not self-identify. Now, I can certainly provide that data from the HR management system and let you know what the breakdown is without identifying, a lot of factors. We can certainly pull those numbers for you, but of the respondents, this is what people chose. Now, what that tells me is when you have almost 20% that prefer to not identify, based on my experience, that tells me a couple of things. Number one, there's something within the culture, either of the city or the organization or within the population, where people feel like either there is no value or they feel like we shouldn't ask, that's the question that we shouldn't have to ask and answer. Sometimes when I speak to people in the focus group, they say, I'm tired of having to check boxes. Why can't we just all be people? And then they will check that box. So sometimes it's an act of defiance. Sometimes it's an act of, people just wanting to not self-identify. Maybe they didn't feel that a category was available, but generally people either see no value in giving the response, think it has nothing to do with or is not germane to the survey, or in an act of defiance, they just choose to not self-identify because they feel like they want to live, in the future state that we never have to ask that question. They feel like that time to exercise that is now. In terms of the analytical explanation, it's on a 5-point Likert survey scale. The top two scores in terms of very valuable or valuable are seen as favorable positive sentiment responses. There is the option to exercise neutral, which means that they are neither positive nor negative. Or the bottom two box scores hold little value or hold no value, and those are seen as unfavorable or negative sentiment scores. So people had the option to choose in those areas. Sometimes you will see a 6 category where they just chose to not answer at all. So they chose to not have to demonstrate neither a positive, neutral, or negative sentiment. So sometimes you'll see 6 options. In terms of key insights, what were those main breaks or main takeaways? In terms of top strengths, top positive sentiments based on employee insights. At work, I feel comfortable being myself. A full 83.34% of respondents demonstrated favorable sentiment toward that response. And again, these are the top 5 most favorable in terms of questions. Everyone working for the city of Kenmore is treated fairly regardless of ethnic background, race, gender, age, disability, or other differences not related to job performance. More than 83% responded with positive sentiment. Everyone at the city of Kenmore is treated fairly regardless of individual differences, such as ethnic background, race, age, disability, sexual orientation, gender, or gender identity. More than 83% responded positively. I believe that I am given adequate opportunities to develop and strengthen my professional skills and experiences at the city of Kenmore. More than 80% of staff responded favorably or positively. And then finally, my supervisor creates an environment that is safe and respectful. Again, 80.56% of respondents answered in regard to answer with a favorable sentiment regarding that question. Top opportunities, top growth opportunities based on employee insight. So these were those bottom 5. These were the ones that had the highest negative sentiment. So the highest negative sentiment. Do you think employees feel like there is a culture of safety to express opinions that run counter to your supervisor, manager, or members of the director's team? Is it safe to disagree openly without fear of punishment or retaliation? That had a 16.67% negative sentiment score. Now, just to give you some grounding in terms of those numbers, and again, I would refer you to the appendices to look at the data because you can see those numbers without the break for factors. But those numbers may seem small to some, and I don't know, may seem large to others. But the average negative sentiment with this staff, you generally only had a negative response from anywhere from ranging from 1 to 3 people. So this staff stands out as an outlier. Now, we talked about Kenmore being an outlier in terms of the community survey response, but your staff did this survey parallel to that survey. So they were not influenced by the community's responses. They were answering in the same window of time. The staff that work for the city of Kenmore are happy. They have strong positive sentiment scores. They feel supported. They feel that there is opportunity to develop. They had very strong feelings in terms of positive sentiment to their supervisors or colleagues and the work that they do for the community. So the average sentiment in terms of negative was under 5%. So these were the highest areas. And these are even low because I could show you neighboring city surveys where the negative sentiment would have been in the 20 or 30 or even 40% range. So in terms of negative sentiment, these were very low negative sentiment scores. Diversity and inclusiveness issues are openly discussed. 13.89% had a negative sentiment score for that. I am paid fairly for the work I do. Again, 18.89% in terms of negative sentiment score. I am clear on the performance standards on which I am evaluated at 11.11%. And then the performance appraisal process at the city of Kenmore is transparent and fair at 8.34%. So these are very low negative sentiment scores in terms of the total population of respondents for the survey. I'll stop and take your questions.
Shannon, I'm just wondering, in a diversity and inclusion survey, the question about compensation was to perhaps draw a parallel to sentiment related to certain segments, or did you get what you wanted from this question?
This would have been, I believe, 2 people that had negative sentiment score, that had negative sentiment scores out of all of the respondents.
Right, but I'm wondering, what is the intention of that question?
The intention of the question is to discern whether or not people in different demographic factor categories felt that they were not being fairly compensated. Okay. So we wanted to look at the staff as a whole. We could look at different departments and we could look at different demographic factor breaks. And there didn't seem to be anything discernible. So when it came to people who were minority versus non-minority, there was no significant break in terms of demographic factor. There was nothing among women that felt that where there was a stronger negative sentiment. There was nothing stronger for people with, at different tenures. So yeah. So this was not a lot of people. This was a couple of people, and it was there was nothing that stood out in terms of who responded in terms of negative sentiment to these responses. So it's pretty even in terms of.
Shanine, I can't find my raised hand little icon here, so I have to
no worries, go ahead.
Interfere here. So does this mean that the city council, the bosses, the managers, are going to be looking at these lower ratings and presumably do something about them?
Well, there's some recommendations on the back end that we'll talk about.
Okay.
But there's always an opportunity to grow and improve. You'll see some recommendations based on our findings today.
Okay.
Okay, let's see. Go ahead. Okay, oh, there we go. All right, so what employees value most about the city of Kenmore? The top attributes of the city of Kenmore mentioned across all groups are its people. Employees consider their colleagues to be caring, knowledgeable, and supportive. Collaboration and respect is greatly appreciated among staff. Another aspect mentioned included consideration and celebration of the diversity of the staff and the community. There was no discernible difference in responses when factoring differences like race, gender, tenure, etc. Some of the things that people have said in those open-ended responses: continue to participate in DEI activities and open conversations. Other direct quotes or attributes to staff: celebrating each other's differences through different holidays, staff highlights, fun bios, creating new traditions with our team to celebrate one another. More staff participation in developing core values and other employee guidelines to live by as an employee. Now, again, these are all direct attributes from staff. It feels very inclusive to have someone listen to my input and consider it when making decisions that affect my position. And then finally, be willing to listen to and validate others' experiences, especially when different from our own. Never talk about others in a negative way. Proactively try to resolve differences when they arise by going directly to the individual. So these are some things that staff called out when it comes to what they value most about the city. These are things that they feel happen, or strongly that these are things that they believe that city leaders and supervisors would support. Top of mind challenges, growth opportunities, having processes, procedures, and operational structure that's clearly communicated to ensure success of staff, particularly newer staff. Newer staff want to understand better. I just started here. I'm trying to figure out how to do a function, how to do a thing. What is the process to get something done? They felt like things were, a little bit kind of thrown together. They want to have a better understanding of professional expectations and access to professional development, again, especially newer staff. Hire enough staff to meet the needs for a growing municipal government and holding leaders accountable for success and failure of progress towards goals. Communication issues mentioned were around clarity of processes, strategies, and objectives. So again, comments that we attribute to staff Understanding of how decisions affect people of color, more of a racial lens is needed. Clearly identifying what it is you are trying to advance and implement the measurable steps that are needed to take place. Follow through and follow up. We get surveys like this or other surveys asking what is most needed, etc., and then there are no action items, no changes. It just seems like we're checking boxes of necessary training and surveys to give the appearance of caring. Global communication rather than leave it to gossip or telephone approach to sharing information. Decisive actions and less ambiguity. It seems to take forever for decisions to be made and change to happen. And then finally, be willing to listen to and validate others' experiences, especially when different from our own. Never talk about others in a negative way. Proactively try to resolve differences when they arise by going again directly to the individual. So these things were messages that were common themes among the responses that we thought captured best some of those top of mind challenges. In terms of recommendations, DEI strategy for the city of Kenmore needs to be intentional with transparency and communication around goals and progress. That means that we have to make sure that we educate leaders and employees on the nature, scope, and benefits of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Expand diversity across the employee base, community programs, and engagement activities. Provide DEI training and support on key issues like cultural competency and professional development. Provide opportunities for authentic employee input with closure on feedback and transparency around decision-making. Seek opportunities for connection and engagement, particularly across different levels of the organization. Again, younger staff didn't feel as connected, didn't feel as part of, or outside of communication chain, didn't know what the professional expectations were in their current role and how they might grow into future opportunities, whether it was within the city of Kenmore or that they would outgrow a small staff and then be able to grow and then go to a neighboring community. And then develop strategies for recognition and acknowledgement of employee contributions. And then finally, develop and communicate access to internal career paths and opportunities, again, for growth and development. I'll stop for questions.
I have an observation, Shannon. So the survey comments, it was mentioned that surveys like this were done in the past. There's no follow-up, no action. One of your recommendations, if we can go back to the following slide, is to provide opportunities for employee input. I think that's part of the equation. The other part is the recipient. Do they know what to do with that? And I can tell you, I have experience with the city of Kenmore where I was asked for, oh, what did you think? And I give back my honest feedback, and then it's dead quiet. And it leaves me wondering, does this person know what to do with that? Is that person empowered to do something about it? Can they take it to somebody? Do they know who to take it to? Are they afraid to take it to somebody because maybe I mentioned someone's name in that feedback? So my input would be to work on the recipient too.
Yeah, thank you for that.
What can be done in that regard? What do we see out there when coaching or guiding people through working through feedback?
Well, I think that one of the most important things is going to be creating a culture of psychological safety, that people feel like if they come forward to give feedback, whether it's anonymous or their name, the ideal situation is that you can create an environment where people can, with their own voice and to raise their own hand, to be identified, to share. That is the ideal state, that people feel so safe that they can say whatever they want, good, bad, or indifferent. They are not fearful of reprisal. So the first thing is to build a culture and have leaders model a behavior so that they can pull information out and people are very sure that they're safe to share. That happens on, small teams first. So that would be the individual contributor with supervisor. That would be in small team and small group huddles. That would be in departments within divisions and then across the division. And people have to be able to see it. So you have to model it for them. You coach them to do it and model through it. So teach me how to do it and coach me through it. So leaders have to lead by example. They have to see that their bosses are able to do that. They have to see that managers and skip level leaders are able to do it. And we have to create opportunities that we guide people and allow for them to do that. But we have to do it in such a way that people, again, feel trust, value, and respect. We set up, if that's what staff desires, rules for engagement, that we share. I want to say something and disagree, but I want to make sure that I'm doing it in a way that's respectful so that it be well received, that it's something that we can act on. So there's ways to be able to do that. But in terms of what the specific strategies will be, my expression is build nothing for them without them. So I can say, provide opportunities for authentic employee feedback with closure on feedback, and transparency around any decision making based on the information.
Right.
I can't propose today what that should look like. The Kenmore staff are the ones that feel this way. And the Kenmore staff will have to be the ones to tell us what they would like to see instituted, what they'd like to see have happen. Because some people may say, well, we want an anonymous email box to send it to, or we want to have a portal where we can go to SharePoint and post something where it's not coming from our email boxes expressly, but we can share something in a place and make sure our feelings are known. We want to make sure that our department director or the city manager addresses it openly, and we have some feedback on the loop. You tell us, well, we'd love to be able to respond to that, and this is how we're going to treat that, or we can't move on that now, but this is why, and this is what we'll commit to do later. So that's what that'll look like. So staff will have to tell us if they want a suggestion box, a SharePoint anonymous box, if they want to have, coffee with the city manager or whatever, or coffee with council. I'm not sure. So staff are the ones that feel some kind of way, and they're going to have to be the ones to contribute to letting us know what kind of tangible, actionable strategies would they feel comfortable with having in place that they would be happy and excited to leverage as part of that communication loop. And I'm sure that it'll be multiple modalities, but staff would have to say what that looks like because they're the ones that would have to own it.
And to address that recommendation, the hope will be then that staff is included in the action plan.
Yeah. And so far, every indication in terms of feedback from the survey is that staff do get included in decisions that impact their workday and their work life. And I think the fact that you have 66% that responded means that most people feel like they do get listened to, so they participated to have their voices be heard because they have the expectation that this will be kind of par for the course, that people are listening. I had one person give feedback and said, this young woman said, this is the first time that I've been asked my opinion, and she was excited about it. So I'm extremely proud of the fact for the city of Kenmore that they've undertaken this process, that they've made it open, and the findings are presented to all the community. We're recording this conversation, and this information is available on the website that anybody can see what staff had to say. So that is really for an organization, next level accountability. Because again, I have private sector clients that, their surveys are privileged, they're marked confidential, their lawyers would never let them be released. And outside of director level and above on a need to know basis, the raw data would never see the light of day. With the dashboard and some high level findings they'd share, and especially recommendations and actions in order to close the gaps in terms of findings. But it would be unheard of for someone in the private sector to share this kind of data.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, you can go to any of the tech companies locally and look at anything having to do with their workforce, and you'll see what the representational diversity looks like for race, for gender, for management, non-management, US global, and that's it. You wouldn't see anything relative to a department, job levels, pay grade, Nothing. You would never see that kind of data.
Mhm.
They wouldn't.
Yeah.
They wouldn't even tell you how many people in the staff took their surveys.
No, I believe you, although my experience with my employer is pretty transparent, but we don't have access to the raw data, as you mentioned. But the comment with the follow-up, having done this before, there's no action, that spoke to me. And that highlights the second end of that recommendation, that we know what to do, the city knows what to do with that feedback, and there is closure. Even if it's to say we are not able to do it, I think it is a form of closure.
Yeah. And I took that one person's response so seriously that I know that other people may feel that. I wanted to make sure that I was included in the recommendations. Yeah. I mean,
Thank you. I think that's very important, because that keeps the integrity of the feedback for next surveys. Perhaps there will be more engagement, the more actions and more value people feel the responses provide.
Yeah. And people want to see that their statements were included and considered. I felt that it was important, given that feedback, that we pull some of those staff statements to make sure that they saw those statements, that we considered those, they were adjudicated as part of this process, and those statements factored into this information. So we're going a lot further in terms of closing that loop for them. And what they'll see next is that the organization with the ability to create some action and communicate that action and hold themselves accountable to those recommendations.
Agreed. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, I thought that in terms of a staff survey, while this is a small staff and a small sample size, it's a very strong response in terms of participation. We got really good information. And, I think that given, some of the tone and some of the responses for the community survey, I thought that this, for the city of Kenmore, I thought that this represented an opportunity to shine, because staff are clearly happy. Staff feel supported. Staff feel like they have an opportunity to grow, even in terms of the tenure. You have a lot of new staff, but you have an equal share that have been here for more than 6 years or more. You have some staff that have been in the organization more than 20 years. And I think that speaks a lot. That says a lot. I mean, the city of Kenmore itself isn't very old. So, Mr. Gill, Carlos.
Is there a timeline in terms of expecting action on the part of the city with regard to these recommendations? Do they set it? Who sets it? Anybody?
That is left at the discretion of the city manager's office and his director's team. They asked for us to work with them to do an assessment of the internal external culture to build a policy. They want recommendations of a policy, and we'll give them that based on feedback from tonight's meeting and other meetings. So I want to be able to take into account what you said in the development of that. That won't be introduced, but it'll be voted on in September. But to these recommendations specifically, in order to get strategies in motion, you have to set SMART goals. You have to set goals where you have both staff, resource, time, and availability. Because I could build an incredible, world-class, equity plan. But if I give it to Mr. Carlinzi and he says, "This is great, Shannon. I wish that I had the staff on hand to be able to do those things. I wish that we had the budget to do these other things," it's going to sit and collect dust. But SMART has to be something that's achievable, that is that you can respond to, that has goals that are attainable. And so the city manager and his directors will take a look at this. They'll set priorities and work to build some strategy. And if they need funds, they'll be able to make recommendations in a timely manner at this point. with regard to what budget requests they may have in terms of strategic growth forward, that they can ask for funding or resources to do any number of things. But these are recommendations that they'll be able to act on over this next year or 2 or 3.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're mentioning that, Shannon, because there were some comments about workload and workflow not being equally distributed. And I know, well, if I'm recalling correctly, there wasn't a question specifically about workflow and workload. But do you think it's something that should be highlighted in the recommendations as far as, or is it more part of the action plan to ensure you have the staff? Because it goes back to how can an employee care for efforts like this if they don't feel like they get a room to breathe, even in their own workflow, right? Because they will need time to talk about this. There will be side projects and task forces and things that need to be done.
Yeah. And really, to be perfectly honest, ideating and coming up and giving that recommendation would have been outside of the scope of what I was asked to do. They wanted me to do the assessment, give them a presentation of findings, consider those factors in creating and drafting a policy around equity that would be citywide. So staff was one consideration, community was another. And so to build an equity plan based on those internal and external assessment findings, but with regard to building a strategy specifically to address these things, I'm more than poised and ready to do that. But the city council asked me specifically to do an assessment and give them a recommendation on an equity policy. But I've given them enough in the recommendations because I know that they'll want to circle back and be able to do something with the assessment. So my firm never wants to do an assessment and have findings and not give them some useful professional advice and counsel. So at every one of these stages, there are always, and you've seen the recommendations, both mine and then tonight we'll capture yours to include in a final assessment and report of this information. So that's why we have the recordings. We'll put, Lily, your recommendations, for example, in. But an equity policy wouldn't address the fact that the staff feels like the government needs to grow a little more, additional staff. And, with a small municipality, I'm sure that even paying for an equity consultant to have come in for the time that I have, I know that was a sacrifice for the city. And they had to say, this is a strong priority. We're willing to make the sacrifice to get this done. But, what does it look like to increase the staff by 20%? Is the city poised financially to do that? That's a question for council and the city manager. So sometimes you have to be a small but mighty, lean, and think of process improvement organization. So those are all things for the city manager and for the council to sit down and take a look at, what's happening. They've heard from the staff that staff feel like they need a little more support, but sometimes it may not even be that they need additional staff. Maybe what they need is what we saw called out. They need a better design around process with better structure. They can make better use of their time and they wouldn't feel like they were spinning their wheels as much. My recommendation would have been put some stronger processes in place, do a little bit of process improvement, see it and talk to staff after that and see if they still feel the same way.
Yeah, that all makes sense. It's a lot to accomplish, a lot of moving pieces, but you're providing guidance to go with the recommendations, and they have the comments. It was clear there. So I don't think I need to repeat it, but it did stand out to me, the feeling about workflow. But again, is it because of inefficiencies? That's a good point as well.
But I'll also say this, Lily. Every city government that I've worked with, especially these last 2 years, everyone is not kind of understaffed, critically understaffed. Every staff feels like in these last several years that they are doing a whole lot more than they would have otherwise. Everyone feels stressed and burned out. And I can say that is Issaquah, that is Kirkland, that is especially Redmond. That's in their recommendations. I'll be presenting at council. That is Bothell for sure, and that's Kenmore. So Kenmore isn't unique in staff feeling that. You know, especially during COVID, you lost the, you know, city governments lost people, and now we're at the precipice of a recession. I don't know what the impact of that will be, but people are certainly feeling the pinch of, you know, folks reassessing life and the meaning of the universe and deciding to go and do something else, and it leaves you with a shortage. Everybody's short. Public and private sector. I mean, you can turn on the news or look at any business pages and they talk about the fact that everyone's struggling for staff. You have restaurants coming up with different service models because they can't find staff. Some are responding with getting robots. So,
or paying for you to pick up your own pizza, right?
exactly. I mean, look at McDonald's. McDonald's has a whole lot. They're gone are the days that you have a whole counter full of registers. Now you have maybe two, but they have kiosks where you punch in your own order and pay yourself.
Oh yeah.
So everybody's trying to respond to, you know, changes in the market and staffing shortages and just trying to figure things out.
Thank you.
Yep. And then again, in the appendices, you see all of those questions. So when you look at the bottom, you get questions numbers 1 through 3, 1, 2, 3, questions 4 through 6, 7 through 9, and 10 through 12, and so on. So you get all of those questions. So you will be able to go from slide to slide. And again, when you take a look at the top, we didn't do any factor breaks for any of these things for the community. We don't want to be able to identify individuals within the department by race or by gender and isolating those responses, because then you would have seen how people responded to different questions with too detailed of an analysis of factor break in presenting this. But you're able to look question by question and look and see what those negative sentiment scores look like. And if you notice, so this was neutral. So this was not a negative sentiment. So when you look, there's very strong positive sentiment or neutral where people didn't feel one way or the other. So you couldn't count it as negative or positive. But then when you look outside of neutral at the strong range of positive or even no response, but the strong range of positive, neutral, or negative sentiment held a very small place from slide to slide. And even at the 15%, you know, you're talking about anywhere from 2 or 3 people. So not a lot of strong negative sentiment, but, you know, more to the point, you had neutral sentiment bubbles or you had agreement. So there were strong neutral sentiment in some of these areas, but otherwise, in terms of positive and negative sentiment, which is what we track for, are people happy or are people angry? Or are people really indifferent and they say, it doesn't affect me either way, so I'm okay. Neutral is, it doesn't affect me either way, I'm okay. What you'd hope is to shrink the neutral and move them to positive, but negative sentiment scores neutral sentiment scores here didn't stand out as outlier. We were really looking for positive and negative sentiment. We tracked and looked at neutral sentiment scores, but even here, this is for this particular strata, this was strongly agree, this was agree, and this was neutral. So the numbers shifted in order to show some different color variants from bar to bar. But again, strong negative, strong positive sentiment, and then neutral. Strongly disagree, neutral, but strong, very strong positive sentiment. So you'll see that throughout. So lots of positive sentiment, lots of strong sentiment. And again, even here, disagree, strongly disagree, and overwhelmingly positive sentiment. I mean, and this especially stands out. My supervisor creates an environment that is safe and respectful. Strongly disagree, or I'm sorry, strongly agree. That's huge. Agree, and then neutral. So people feel really good about working at the city of Kenmore. Oh, this, I gotta replace this slide for you. This was for Hispanic and Latinx. No, I'll swap this slide out. I'm so sorry that's there. But in terms of open-ended responses, you have all of the open-ended responses that were submitted. So for each of the questions, what is needed to build a sense of trust, value, and respect for those working as employees of the city of Kenmore? You'll get to see all of the responses. 16 people responded, 20 people skipped. What can employees offer to help build and maintain a sense of trust, value, and respect for those working as employees of the city of Kenmore? 16 responses, 20 skipped, but you have all of those responses that you can review. When you think of the city of Kenmore as a true collaborative partner, what would or should the city be doing so that your experience or the impact matches the intentional efforts of city leaders, directors, or council members? 12 people answered, 24 skipped, but you have all of those responses. What actions would best advance DEIB across the city of Kenmore? 16 responded and 20 people skipped. And that's it. Oh. So there you have it. Very strong, positive sentiment. I think that the opportunity is for the places where you have 6 to 8 people that, didn't answer either way. They were neutral. Neutral is, I think that for at least for our purposes, statistically, neutral is better than a non-response. I would have people say, I don't feel strongly either way than refusing to answer altogether and us trying to guess whether or not they were neutral or had negative sentiment and just were so negative that they chose to not respond, or they were afraid to respond. They weren't afraid to respond in answering neutrally. They were saying that they were in the middle. It wasn't good or bad. It was just in the middle. And sometimes in the middle is to be content. Sometimes in the middle is to give a C grade. So you're not failing, you're not excelling. Sometimes neutral is that, that's just where you should be. But we can certainly, circle back. You can talk to staff and figure out what they really meant. But I think that some of that is captured even in the comment. Do you all have any?
Overall, the policy you find really fertile ground. This is positive, in my opinion, because this policy will be met by people who are overall satisfied with their job, have positive sentiment about the DEI. So I guess it has to happen, right?
Yeah. Aisha.
I'm unmuted. I just want to thank you for putting this survey together. You captured their feelings and their sentiments and what is it that they need from the city to grow and be better employees and citizens, and then serve the citizens. So it's a lot of work, but it's very comprehensive. And as a resident, it gives me hope that the city is working to make the employees have better lives in order to be able to serve their community. So it's a benefit and I appreciate it. And thank you so much for the hard work. Thank you.
Thank you. Juanita.
Yes, I wanted to say that this survey, like the other survey, is great. It must be hard for people who haven't had the chance to understand how social research is done. For me, when I first got into community psychology, I had just come from taking all these mathematics classes and chemistries, and our first project to get some data, and I just kept saying, what are we looking for? What are we supposed to solve? You know, in my head, I was so used to solving for X. I needed to solve a problem right away. And my professor said, Juanita, this is social research. You have to go out and collect the data. We cannot make answers and assumptions right now. We have to go out and get the data. So it's a very different process. And that was really hard for me to wrap my head around. It took a while to do that, because my first, and I think we do this a lot. We just want to solve the problem right away. I can just do it. And this process, people are not that way. And environmental changes, things happen out in the world socially that's going to impact our communities and the way in which we act in them and with each other. And so it does take a while. So I commend like the staff and everybody's helped out with this, because they might not be familiar with these processes. And we all want answers right away, but it does take time. But those developing a policy around the data can really help make those changes that we need to have for those policies. I just know it takes time, and hopefully we can see some of these changes. But I really I'm so glad this is happening in my community. Thank you so much. And for all the staff, because I know this can be, it's people and it's our community, and it can be very emotional going through this. And so I'm happy that I'm going through it with you, with somebody, because it's a very emotional process. And for some of those policies that we had with the staff, and how to develop some of those policies, I think it would be great to have a bridge to other communities or within our community about what they're doing in when they have a growing business. How are they still able to engage with their employees when it's growing, when it might feel like if you're working for a big company or a big place, you're a number instead of a small intimate where you know everybody. And I think that having valuable input from employees that gives ownership to, and it empowers. And I think having the staff to be able to create some of those policies that affect them is amazing. Why it's not done in every company is just, I think people would be happier going to work. And I know that it's been difficult during these times when we're not together. It's hard when you're not face to face with somebody and you don't have that connection, because our brains are actually wired for that empathy to happen when we're with people. But I think we're going the right way about these policies, and I'm so glad we're going off data and not making assumptions about what to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's see, Juliana.
Yes, thank you. Juanita, that was a really beautiful comment. Thank you for everything you just shared. I want to echo a little bit of, I think everybody, I love what Juanita said about going off of data. Yes, I think especially as we all have our own perceptions and emotions. I'm so glad that we had so much feedback, both from the community and from the City of Kenmore workforce. And then I also want to piggyback on what Lily said about how I'm just so grateful that it sounds like there is such an existing buy-in and positive space in the City of Kenmore as an entity, as an organization, because I think if there's a lot of divisiveness and lack of trust or bitterness, that would just be spoiling the roots of anything that we would try to be offering to a community. So I'm just so grateful that it sounds like the City of Kenmore has a very healthy foundation for us to, continue to grow as something broader in the community. So thank you again so much, Shannon. This has been really great to learn from you, and I'm really grateful to go over these results tonight.
Thank you. And I also want to just share one more thing, and I'll come right to you, Mr. Gill, Carlos. I've worked with other municipalities, and generally what you hear at least half of the time is staff with very strong feelings at every level and with negative sentiment toward senior most leaders. And people generally feel closer to the manager closest to them, but the further you move away in terms of the hierarchy of leaders, the higher the leader, the less line staff trust them, the less they feel connected, and the more you see in terms of an increase in negative sentiment for both directors and for council. And I was surprised that there were not a lot of negative comments. Quite frankly, I was surprised that there weren't a lot of negative comments about the city manager specifically, about directors specifically, and about council. I mean, I had a neighboring communities that where staff said, I wish that our council and directors got along together. They need to work to it's painful to watch them engage. You didn't have comments like that. People, the fact that they're not attacking the council is doing something right. The fact that they're not dragging the city manager through the muck, the manager and directors are doing something right. The fact that you can look at those sentiment scores and see people either indifferent, like they don't shine. And some people do surveys where they literally won't give the highest sentiment because they're like, well, I can't give you a 10 because I gotta say that you have to leave room for people to grow. Some people will just not give the highest score because they just think that, you know, that that's the lazy thing to do, unless they feel very strongly that you deserve it. They're gonna always give you something that's, you know, just under that or maybe in the middle. And so that's why I don't look so harshly at the neutral, because they feel like, well, that's kind of the baseline. That's where you should be. You got to earn something higher than that. But I looked at those negative sentiment, those neutral sentiment scores that way because you didn't have a whole lot of vitriol in the open-ended responses. I was expecting to see more negative commentary, but absent that, when I talked to Leonora to give her the update and the debrief, I said, you got to pat yourself on the back because this was good.
Mhm.
This was really good. So you can take that as well. Carlos.
I think I've mentioned to you before that I've lived in Kenmore for a very long time. And and I generally feel that the city has been either very good or neutrally good for someone like me. And so in many ways, I'm not totally surprised at the benevolent quality that we're discovering here. But I do have to recognize that we are a small city. We are a new city. We don't have large segments of poverty-stricken areas. We do have some. I've been to them. I've visited them a couple of times recently. But we're not like South Seattle or Tacoma or those kinds of places. So in many ways, I think what you've discovered in your work, your excellent work, I've said that before, what you've discovered in many ways is not totally surprising. But I think the last thing that I want to say is that it makes me feel good to hear all this, because I've been saying to myself, given the dark forces that are reported, in the newspapers about America as a whole, that I want to move to Canada or Mexico instead of living here. But down at the grassroots, at least in Western Washington, and at least in Kenmore, things are not so dire. And I really, in the end, feel that as a country, as a nation, we're going to work our way through, and our democratic institutions are going to be strong enough to weather what we're facing at this point. And so this survey and the work that we've done as a committee, I think in many ways supports this hopeful feeling that I have about our country. Thank you.
Yep. You know, Carlos, there's a part of me, having worked with so many governments at the state level down to the local level, there literally is a part of me that feels like I should go to an award shop and commission and get one of those little glass trophies and give one to Rob Carlindsey and tell him that he's got the happiest staff that I've ever worked with. Because I'm telling you, I've seen the surveys come back with hundreds of responses, and just, you know, and done focus groups, and it's just, you're an outlier. You have a happy little staff. So maybe it's because it's such a small staff that people have the time to connect and reach out and touch someone, and maybe it's because they're just not lost in a sea of people. But whatever is happening, there is a magic there. And, you know, as long as the city continues to lean in, as long as the city continues to engage, as long as they improve communication and close those gaps for folks, that they know what's happening, when it's happening, what the expectations are, what these processes are, build those processes. You know, there's the programs, processes, and protocols that people know what to anticipate, but it's loose enough that it's fluid enough that people can affect change when they feel like things could still improve. I think that the results will get better, but having this survey means that we can do it one in another year, and then another year, and we can track and look at the baseline and then see how the numbers shift. That's, for me, the exciting thing, that you can start with the baseline and see what it looks like year over year, and that helps you in developing strategies to grow. Nancy.
Well, Shannon, I feel like we're on the same brain wave there in terms of building on the hope and the baseline of start that we have this year. So I wanted to go on record to share excitement on the continued work building off of the data and research you and your team have done by City Council and those folks who are in leadership power positions, and to see, you know, we are starting in a great place, and to continue building off of that and measuring year over year, and maybe taking the work you've done and started building that out into an action plan or a 5-year plan, and having those metrics in place. And again, not losing that momentum and steam, but wanting to say it on the recording of we hope there's more to come yet, and to really live in and lean into your recommendations of that feedback loop, the accountability. I think that's where trust really can continue, is that accountability piece, that coming back and walking the talk. So just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll tell you, having done this full needs assessment, the city has all of the data and recommendations that all they have to do is pull a lever, and we can build that 5-year, that 3-year roadmap, that 5-year roadmap. Everything that I would have had to do in order to work with them to build a roadmap like we did in Kirkland City Council had a presentation of that draft roadmap in May at a council study session, I believe it was. So you can go to Kirkland City Council for that. Take a look at that. As long and exhaustive, but a lot of that research that would have been done to get to that, a lot of that has been done in this process. There's not too much more we'd have to do to get there, but you could certainly affordably pull that lever and get that. Let's see, Juanita.
Oh, yes, I just wanted to make a comment, actually respond to Carlos. Do you remember at the beginning of this process, you were not as hopeful as you are today. So and I'm just so grateful that you feel this hope. So I don't know if you remember, but that something has happened along the way to give you a little bit more hope. So I wanted to just, hey, that's awesome. Give you a shout out to say this process is doing something, right? It's so I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, well, in answer to your question, Juanita, I think that comment at the beginning of our exercise was more reflective on the fact that I've had a lot to do with a lot of diversity efforts of various kinds over the last 40 years, 50 years, because I'm an old guy. Okay. And so diversity isn't new to me. It's something that I've been looking at over and over and over again in many ways. And so when I talked to Eleonora and she said, "Oh, Carlos, we have a diversity committee going here. Will you help us?" I had seen many of these before. And so I wasn't jumping for joy in that sense, because for the reasons that I've said. But the work has been done. Shanine has done great work. She's discovered information that we didn't have at the beginning. And in many ways, we're like so many other I study governments. And so in many ways, we're like so many progressive-minded governments that put together rules and regulations and constitutions that look really super. Chile has just finished writing a marvelous constitution of a kind that we would love to have in this country. Colombia has just elected a so-called leftist former guerrilla leader, now president of Colombia, last week. And so on and so on. I can give you more examples. But the test is on the application and bringing the stuff into some kind of practical, real result in the end. And so we're at that point ourselves here in Kenmore.
Yep. So with that, the City of Kenmore City Council has seated a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging task force to partner and collaborate with their consultant. And that would be my firm, Shannon Kelly Ray Consulting, LLC of Washington State, to work alongside you to be able to present my findings and information, to get feedback and recommendations from you. And your seating keeps you impaneled through my process for the assessment. The assessment process is now complete. And so with that, there were plans by the council that this body should be sunset at the conclusion of the assessment process, and that time is now. And so based on your recommendations, the city council, as well as the city manager's office, is exploring their options to continue with engagement of a task force based on your recommendations. So I'm sure that Leonora and Mr. Colinzi's office will communicate with you sometime in the very near future, because I know that it's their strong desire to keep you impaneled and to think about a way to have you as community members participating in a way that makes sense for you and for the city, that it's mutually beneficial. So I know that they're going to want to call on you again. So stay prepared and sit tight. But with that, our time together is over. I'm looking forward to them empaneling you again, because I look forward to an opportunity to work with you in some capacity in the future. Make sure that I'm connected with you all on LinkedIn. I want to keep you updated. You can follow my adventures from city to city, but I am sure that I will be back at the city that is nearest and dearest to you all in some capacity. So I know we'll be presenting to council coming up, I believe in July. We'll be coming together. I'll be available to them again, and also September, to answer questions as they consider an equity policy to vote on and adopt for the city. But that would not have happened without your partnership, your collaboration, and your support. So I personally want to thank you on behalf of the Kenmore City Council, Mr. Carl Lindsay as the city manager, and his staff, Leonora, and again, many others. I also want to make sure that I do a special shout out and call out to Nancy, to Janet Quinn, to Council Member Karina File, Rael, who was a task force member for the city of Bothell, as well as Linwood and Cameron. I want to thank you all for your time and your service. It is much appreciated. I say build nothing for them without them. I would not have taken the charge to build a policy for the city without the input of the city, without being able to reach out to a phone call and email and knock on doors and reach out. This stuff happened, this work happened because of your leadership and support. Of course, Lauren Chomiak and helping with marketing and communication. Brian as well, helping us figure out the logistics to get you seated and to offer those stipends and different things to work with you. None of this would have happened without the leadership, dedication of staff. And most importantly, I want to make sure that I shout out Anastasia as well as Nancy, folks in the city manager's office as administrative staff for support to make sure that we were able to meet, that we had an infrastructure and created space that we could record and make information available to you and to the community. Work wouldn't have happened without you. So I thank you on behalf of the community that is the beloved community that you so generously serve. And I think that the work that you've done alongside us is going to go a long way to moving us forward, to moving the needle, so that everyone that lives in, that works in, or that visits the community of Kenmore's life will be made whole and made better because of your service. So thank you so much. And I appreciated having this opportunity, this pleasure, this honor to work alongside you. Thank you so much. Leonora, I will send it back to you.
Thank you, Shannon, and task force members and city clerk and everyone who's shepherded us through the process, and especially this hybrid. A big thanks to all of you for your service to the community. And as you can see, we have a ways to go, and that's why we needed you. We have a lot to build on. And task force members, I will be reaching out to you, so stay tuned. Thank you all so very much. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Thanks, you too. Thanks. Bye. Bye, Maura.
Bye.
Thanks for your help, you guys.